Welcome back to the TrailBLAZER pod. Alex Fleksher is usually the one sharing stories and asking the questions. Today, I get to share her story. From her father's conversion to Judaism, the challenging stereotypes about Orthodox women, Alex shares her personal story and insights on empowering others in the community. We'll explore the impact of social media, the Faces of Orthodoxy initiative, and why authentic representation matters. Tune in for a conversation about breaking barriers and leading with authenticity. Let's dive in. Hi, Alex. How are you? Welcome to the TrailBLAZER pod.
Thank you so much for having me. This is just super exciting to be on your podcast.
Thank you. You're usually the one interviewing people, so how does it feel?
Oh, I love it. I honestly love being on the other side of the camera, other side of the microphone.
Amazing.
So thank you
Of
for this
course.
opportunity.
Let's get right into it. I know you currently live in Cleveland and you're very involved in the Jewish community in so many different ways. You can write a whole list. But I want to ask you if you can share a little bit of a background of where you grew up and how you grew up. Like what's your story? Where did it start?
Sure. Great question. I love, getting the background
Yeah,
on people. There's a lot of context as to why people are doing what they're
exactly.
doing currently. So I happen to have been born in Manhattan in New York City, although I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. So I really consider myself an out of towner.
Okay.
Um, my father's British and my mother's South African. Particularly my father fulfilled his lifelong dream to move to America,
Wow.
and I was a product of that. And, I think maybe even a bit of an embodiment of all of their dreams for, the American dream in
Wow.
a sense.
Yeah.
So, I was a toddler in Manhattan. They realized that they didn't want to raise me on, cement and Central Park. So they decided to move to Atlanta, Georgia. I think it sort of fit their
Mm.
South African British
Yeah.
sensibilities. Atlanta, it's the South. It's very polite society, and they really enjoyed it. And my father was in advertising. My mother was a stylist. She did sets
Oh.
and wardrobe for TV commercials. So they were really in that
Mm-hmm.
arts world. Atlanta actually was a hub of that in the 80s and
Really, I didn't
90s.
know that.
Yeah,
Interesting.
now actually it's a major film hub. They do a lot of
Wow.
location filming there. And, my father wasn't Jewish and my mom was. And I appreciate you do your research. We were just discussing before
Yep.
in advance to come on to the podcast, and you know my story a little bit already. So yeah, so they had to make the decision how they were going to raise me. And my father tells this story is that I was sitting in my high chair. I must have been 2 years old, and he was sort of having this internal debate: is she
Mm-hmm.
Jewish? Is she not Jewish? And he said he turned around to look at me and he saw these deep brown Jewish eyes. These were the eyes that he saw in my mother.
Wow.
Which when he first met my mother, he said it was like his soul leapt to her. Like it was like his Jewish soul really connecting with another Jewish soul. He wasn't Jewish, but we know that converts have a Jewish soul, which is fascinating. And he said he turned around to my mother and he's like, she's Jewish. My mother's like, well, I did learn that, if the mother's Jewish,
Yeah.
she's Jewish. And my father said, I don't care about any of that. I just know that she's Jewish. Now, that
Wow.
doesn't mean they immediately enrolled me
Right.
into, synagogue, preschool, or anything like that. It was a journey of, when I got a little older, my mother sent me she had an interview with a local Catholic school, preschool, because she grew up in a convent, believe it or not, in South Africa. That was the
Oh my
norm.
gosh.
It's not crazy because the
Wow.
education was so much better. So there were Jewish students who would go. They used to sit out for mass. They didn't have to go to prayer services, mass in the morning,
That's crazy.
but it's crazy. So she's like, "Oh, this is the best education." She'll go to a Catholic school. She walked in the door, saw a crucifix,
Well, yeah.
and she's like, "PTSD, can't do this. I'm not doing this to my daughter."
That's hilarious.
So over the years, I was in public school. I went to a Jewish day school in first grade, came home with my sitter and my, challahs for Shabbat, and pulled me out. They couldn't deal with the cognitive dissonance of not practicing that on their own, even
Wow.
though it wasn't an Orthodox school. Very briefly, in a nutshell, my father did start exploring Judaism on his own. He always felt an affinity to the Jews. My mother was kicking and screaming. She's the Jewish one. I grew up with Christmas trees. I grew up with Easter egg hunts, and Hanukkah, and I don't know, brisket on Pesach. Honestly, I have no memories of Pesach. I only have memories of Christmas.
Well, that's where the
So
presents
weird.
were, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Putting out cookies for
Yeah.
Santa the night before with milk. I mean,
Wow.
how can you forget that?
That's amazing. So how old were you when your father went through that whole journey?
Yeah. So he converted when I was 12, and believe it or not, we always say he was the one that brought my mother back to her own Judaism. Through his journey, my mother started she literally was kicking and fighting. Like when
Yeah.
he decided he wanted to go an Orthodox shul and convinced my mother to come, and it was separate seating. And this was like a mechitza that was so short. It was like such a walk. She freaked out, but through her own journey of meeting Orthodox women, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about women who are role models for us, strong Jewish women. She started meeting her own strong Jewish
Wow.
women and role models and friends, and all of her stereotypes of what Orthodox women were sort of went out the window, and she ended up fully embracing it. So they got remarried. I was 12. They had a proper chuppah. They had a
Wow.
party. Funnily enough, my mother told my father when they first got married, they got married by a justice of the peace. It was a government wedding,
Okay.
non-religious ceremony. She told my dad, on our 20th wedding anniversary, she said in her South African accent, I want the proper wedding. I can't do South Africa. Little did she know that this was their 25th wedding anniversary, with the
Wow.
year that they got remarried.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was the flower, walked down the aisle to the chuppah, the flower girl. So it was a
Wow.
very special moment in my life. And, now I have 5 kids. My oldest is 21. My youngest is 5. We're raising FFB kids. We're raising from birth kids in the
Wow.
system. And like, I so appreciate, like, my entry into religious Judaism was pure joy. Like, I did switch from a public school to a Jewish school in 6th grade, and definitely struggled
Yeah.
with the Hebrew and the translations, and had lots of questions. But more or less, I was really able to we entered the most warm and loving community in Atlanta, Georgia. So not judgmental. We were invited out for Shabbos. I mean, it was like I was on this journey with my parents. I had only the most
Wow.
positive experiences. And like, we look at people's experiences in the Orthodox community, and there's such a range. And like, I just am so blessed that I had positive, and there are people that don't have these positive experiences, and that impacts them for their whole life, just like my positive experience
Yeah.
paved the way for me.
Wow. Okay. There's so much here. So first of all, I find it really interesting that your mother was like trying to figure out if the stereotypes were correct and like
Yeah.
breaking those walls. And you're kind of doing that now with the whole social media thing, which we're going to get into. I find that very
Yes.
interesting. I'm curious, are you the only child? Is that correct?
I'm an only child.
Okay.
Yes.
So you kind of were like going through this with your parents completely.
I was going through this with my parents. I think for a long time, my identity and my journey was sort of wrapped up in my father's journey. And I absolutely had to sort of separate at some point and realize that, like, his journey is his journey and my journey is my journey. I
Yeah.
can't always identify myself as like the daughter of a convert. I can
Interesting.
go on my own path in my own right.
I
And that
love
took
it.
some time.
I love
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Well, the name of this podcast is Trailblazing, so it's really about
Yeah.
finding your own. You did say in a interview, I think, or an article,
Yeah.
that your father's conversion was always a source of pride for you. You knew that you were always a Jew, because your mother was Jewish,
Yeah.
and your father not being Jewish never affected your Jewishness until you were in Shidduchim. So I'm curious what that was like, because yes, your parents were going through this at 12, which I think is a really interesting age, because at 12 we already understand what's happening and like dealing with our own, it's very young, but dealing with our own like, who am I in the world? So I find it fascinating that it happened at that time, and that you didn't have this pull of like, what does that mean, until you were in Shidduchim, which is, how old were you? 18, 19?
I was in Stern College. I was probably like 20, 21,
Yeah.
20 when I started
Yeah.
dating. Yeah.
So that's a nice amount of years where you didn't feel this at all. So I'm curious what
I
happened there.
felt zero negativity. I was always is, still is a huge source of pride. Growing up, I was always so proud. I was involved in NCSY. So we're talking about very nurturing environments for
Yeah.
people who are Baal Shuvas, where it's like, at NCSY, who are the kids that are propped up? The ones who are lighting Shabbos candles
Yeah.
in the closet. So like for me, I had my own story too, and I
Wow.
was very proud of it. And I think growing up in a non-judgmental religious environment fosters that.
Yes.
No, I never, I had 2 negative experiences with dating.
Hmm.
One was a shadchan who suggested a guy who I knew from NCSY, and I just knew it wasn't right for me. It wasn't what I knew him. Like, no, I was not interested. And this shadchan, a rabbi, turned around to me. I don't know if he was a shadchan or just a rabbi who like did this on
Yeah.
the side kind of thing, but he literally was like flabbergasted that I said no to this guy. And he's like, what? He doesn't mind that your father converted.
Oh my God. That's so
Yeah.
condescending.
So condescending. Like, that's all I am.
Wow.
That
Wow.
defines me, and that's going to be my only credential for why
Oh
I
my
should
God.
go out with someone. And
Yeah.
that was very painful. And then another scenario was when a friend set me up with a guy, and we didn't know what we were doing. I mean, we're like a Balchuva family. I knew no rules, like nothing. And I remember she was like, yeah, like, here's his number, you know, and we just spoke over the phone. And honestly, now in Shidduchim, people don't even speak on the phone.
Right.
Before. And little me, who didn't know anything, we ended up having like hours-long conversations on the phone. A conversation on the phone. You know, I was so naive. At one point in like our conversation on the phone before I met the guy, something came up about my dad. And this boy was like, I'm a Kohen. I'm like, okay. He's like, I think there's a problem with this. And I'm like, what? A problem? Yeah. There's no problem with me. I'm Jewish.
Yeah.
And this is why we look into people. We want to just make sure everything is aligned, because there was a problem. And there is a problem with a Kohen marrying the child of a convert if the convert converted after the child was born. And that was a huge, honestly, an identity shift for me. I know my uncle was very close with a number of leaders and Rabbanim in Manhattan. I know he got me on the phone with Rabbi Mordechai Willig at YU, like to explain the halachic piece, hashkafic piece. I felt like I didn't think there was quote unquote anything wrong with me. And that understanding this halacha made me feel that I wasn't fully Jewish, which of course isn't true, but it made me feel my status somewhat inferior and limited.
Wow.
And that was hard for me as well. So
what helped with that specifically?
It only helped once I actually got engaged. And my to-be husband reached out to our Rav from Atlanta, Georgia, Rabbi Elan Feldman. And he had the question, do I need to know anything? Like, in the fact that she was born before her father converted, are they, and there could be questions. Are they technically married? There are lots of, and one should find out. And all Rabbi Feldman, he just turned around to my husband and he said, the only thing he said, and this literally healed me when I heard that he said this, he said, I would marry her to my own son. Aww. Yeah. And I was like, okay, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good. It was a matter of acceptance,
Wow.
So that healed it for me.
Wow. Okay. The reason I ask people their background is exactly because of this. First of all, you have one of the most interesting ones so far on the podcast, but because it really sets the tone for what people end up doing, it always somehow connects. And I'm so excited to get into all that stuff. But just before we do, I'm curious, what is your educational background? What did you study in college and what was your first job? Because I think the trajectory is interesting.
I love these questions. I love these questions. So, I went to seminary after high school to Darchei Bina. And then I went to Stern. I was always like the English person versus the math science person. And I decided to study English communications for my undergraduate degree. But I'm a very idealistic person. And I really credit my family's journey, our shul in Atlanta, Georgia, and my very massive involvement in NCSY in high school. I was actually on like national board in 12th grade. And National NCSY of the Year. These are my creds.
Oh, okay.
So NCSY taught me all about Jewish leadership and planted a seed to contribute to building the Jewish community. And thinking of what I wanted to do, I felt that let me step back. I thought maybe I would want to work in like a nonprofit. I spent a summer working at Asia Torah in London, HUK. Doing some marketing because again my degree was communications, public relations, which is also funny.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And I remember sitting behind a computer helping type up and work on their like annual report. I was like 20 years old. Thinking very clearly, I don't want to be writing about these things. I want to be the one doing them.
I love it. Because
I had done some like partners in Torah there before, and it just as I was volunteering, it just like fed me to be on that side of the table. And that's when I decided that I wanted to go into Jewish education. So I ended up getting a master's from Azrieli Graduate School, which is the YU's graduate school and Jewish education. And I had my degree in English. So I felt like, I could do either. I could teach English. I could teach Judaic studies. I only must be in a Jewish school because I want to impact Jewish kids. Wow. So my first job, I was in Manhattan living with my aunt and uncle on 60th and 69th and Broadway, living it up, not paying any rent. And I would walk every day to Manhattan Day School. I taught first grade. I was an assistant. Great first job. I cannot control a room of first graders for my life.
Oh, that's funny.
And my first real job after I got married, we moved to Baltimore. My husband was learning in the Kollel and Neri Star at the time. And my first full-time job was at Beth Tefillah. It's a communion school. The funniest part about this is I remember applying. This says something about the state of Jewish education. This was a while ago. I hope things are better. I applied to Beis Yaakov to teach English. They offered me like $12,000 a year. And I laughed at them. And I'm like, I have a master's degree
Yeah.
and I cannot support my husband on $12,000
Oh
a
my
year.
god. Beis Yaakov, Baltimore? It's probably the same throughout, honestly. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the salaries, they're like, oh, well, it's part time because it was part time because it's only English.
Yeah.
And, a lot of mothers want, to have that. And I'm like, I am
Yeah.
like rearing up just out of graduate school, ready for like my
Oh
first
my
job,
gosh.
and it's not landing there.
Oh.
So I taught full time at Beth Phil, which is a community school. It's a very professional school. I taught, but my dream came true. I got to teach middle school English and Judaic studies all day long.
Wow.
Got a normal salary and fulfilled that dream of mine. And over the years, I spent 15 years in the classroom, middle school, high school, English, Judaic studies. I was involved here in Cleveland starting a girls' school I'm so proud of, Chaviva High School, that's thriving.
Wow.
So I'm very passionate about Jewish education. I did leave. I'm one of those teachers that quit. I have to say, as my family got older, I just found the grading and the prep out of school hours just too much, especially English.
Well, I wouldn't call it quitting. There's quitting and then there's realizing that something's not right for you anymore. But I will say, I wish I had you as a teacher. Your energy is incredible. I cannot imagine the impact you've had on your students.
Thank you.
So, okay, pivoting a little bit, you had this 15 years of teaching. Something that I found very interesting was the stuff you said about the show.
Yeah.
So for a little bit of context, I grew up Hasidish. So, and kind of, found my own way. I knew it's one person's story. It's not everyone's story. And I had people come up to me and be like, is this true? Is this how your life was? And I was like, absolutely not. So another quote, when any new show about Orthodox Jews pops up on Netflix, the immediate question Orthodox Jews asks, is this good for the Jews? And in almost all cases, we already know the answer. So what are some of the common stereotypes and false portrayals of the Orthodox community? And I ask this because this podcast is not only catered to Orthodox women, it's for all Jewish women. And so I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this are not familiar with the Orthodox community at all. So if you can share about that.
Sure. I would just like to give a little context that Julia Hart was my high school Judaic studies teacher.
Wow.
And she made our Sheva Brachos, for those of you who are unfamiliar. It's one of the, celebrations after the wedding. So I was really close with her.
Really?
Yeah. And we can talk about that later, why I felt motivated. But exactly like you said, I hope people can appreciate that from the beginning of this interview. I have deep sensitivity to those who have been hurt in the system. Okay? And if somebody wants to share their story and that's important to them and that's part of their therapeutic process, they can do that. But the biggest danger that I felt about this show is that, you said, it's saying that her story is our story. And literally, we talk about media misrepresentation. It was literally misrepresenting Orthodox women and Orthodox Judaism. And that is why we as Orthodox women needed to respond. And that's how I created this hashtag, my Orthodox life. Yeah. Because you asked me, what are the stereotypes? There's this narrative that we so often see in these types of shows. It's sort of like the Little Mermaid effect, she wants more. And what would life be like if she were free and could make her own decisions and, be up on the land? And, this portrayal of Orthodox women not having any agency or autonomy, who only once they can be liberated can finally be themselves. Now, yes, of course, sometimes people have those experiences. That is true. And we must acknowledge that. But that is not the story of Orthodox women, and that is not the global story of what Orthodox Judaism is. Of course, people can have individual negative experiences, but it's not what we believe and not what we purport. So I think I'll go back to some of my mother's stereotypes. I remember my mother used to tell me, Orthodox women are baby making machines.
It's full circle. I love it.
Yeah. And, Orthodox women, they don't know how to dress and they dress like schlumps. And my mother, I remember one of the main, listen, I have to say, in the 80s, not all Orthodox women were the most stylish. In the 90s, they wore, there's this biz skirt idea, these floppy skirts, whatever. But when she met the Lubavitch woman, who are like, my parents also, again, they're in film, they're in the arts, they're, that's the world that they come from. And they'd be like, the Rebbitzin looked like she walked out of Vogue magazine, And that was like the
Yeah.
biggest source of honor and
Oh,
pride.
wow. Yeah.
And I think as a community, yeah, I mean, maybe to the opposite effect, this generation, I think, is a little too steeped in materialism and externals. In the Orthodox community, I think
Yeah.
women maybe struggle with that image, of having, too high
Yeah.
standards. But I think there's a lot of stereotypes about, again, autonomy, and women's choice and women's appearances. And those are just some of the, and Julia Hart continued to reinforce that when she, said, reading these articles, Orthodox women are not allowed to ride bikes. Orthodox women, if they have an immodest piece of clothing, they have to burn it in acid. They're not allowed to get higher education past 17. Claims that are just patently false.
Yeah, but like, and again, it goes back to, okay, if this was your story, say it as your story, right? Say, I experienced that, but I think you're the perfect person to speak out against this because of your background and because you don't come from this very biased place, right? Because you actually have the other side of it. Did you come across women who were like taking this very personally, or like, did you see it really affect the community, or was this something that you were like, okay, this is very personal to me, and this is a mission I'm taking upon myself?
That's a really great question, because sometimes people. So basically, what happens when I saw the show coming out, when I read all of the articles and the press stuff, and I even like commented months before when she posted on her Instagram, I was like, "Congratulations!" I didn't know what the show was about. And she's like, "Hey, people," and then we launched this, response #MyOrthodox site, just to give some context in case your listeners don't know. And I invited Orthodox women to share their stories. Just tell, I didn't think this was going to go global or viral or anything, but, tell the world, the quote unquote world, on your platform of your Facebook page, who are you? Why are you Orthodox? Tell us about your life. Tell us what you love. Tell us your story. That was the goal. It's like everyone should now say their stories to combat this one narrative. And people did ask me, like, were you hurt? Were you like disappointed this was your mentor? It was so long ago. I had heard years ago that she stopped being religious, and I have some sympathy for her as someone who was highly drawn to the arts. And I do think creative, artistic women sometimes may struggle on finding outlets, and there are outlets, but like finding their place. And I know, and I think she also had a lot of pain in her story. So I have like sympathy for her, but it never was like, I never was hurt. I honestly, I know it sounds crazy. It wasn't personal. It was what we need to mobilize as Orthodox women. We need a response to this. I'm very happy to lead this initiative, but we all need a response to this. It's not about me. And there was some mixed response. I had women who were like never posting. They were lurkers on social media who were like the first ones to put their picture up and share their stories. I mean, it literally went viral. It was nuts. I was interviewed by USA Today, all the major Jewish news platforms, Jerusalem Post, they all covered articles on this. I was like constantly doing interviews, and I think it was very empowering. It was a very special moment for Orthodox women, and I'll say Orthodox Judaism. But yes, there was absolutely backlash, and I monitored this very carefully, and I would post and tweet ideas to sort of reframe this. That again, this is not to invalidate the journey of those who have left. The problem is that she's purporting to be a voice of all Orthodox women.
What an incredible initiative. I don't, the way you talk about it doesn't seem personal. It's exactly what you're saying. It was bigger than you.
It was.
Like Was there anything like that came out that was extremely surprising or shocking to you from this?
I don't have anything extremely surprising or shocking. I will say incredibly heartwarming. I know it's not the right answer, but
no,
I'll tell you why. Like, there's, there, especially on social media, there is like a lot of grumbling. People are upset about no pictures of women in Orthodox media. People are upset about that. And social media can so often be used as a breeding ground for complaining about the Orthodox community. Yeah. And like, here it was like, oh my gosh, like so many strong Orthodox women from all segments. Forget about whatever gripes and whatever stuff we're like complaining about. Like, we are so proud to be here. And this is why I am still here. And this is
So
why I
beautiful.
do what I do. And if you check on like Instagram and you put the hashtag in and you see the grid, what pops up, you see photos of women who are in tank tops next to a post of a Hasidic lady with her
Yeah.
7 children and her
It's
family.
incredible.
And it was like, each of them are identifying as Orthodox. This is
Yeah.
meaningful to each of them. And this is why they were motivated to stand up and speak their truth.
Wow.
So I just found it hugely inspiring.
Yeah. No, it was the perfect answer. Okay, so I wasn't on Instagram or any social media for 4 years, and I started social media again in October when I started the podcast.
I just want to say good for you.
Thank you. But so I didn't know this existed because
Yeah.
I was like off the grid. And so when I came back on and I was like, I found you, I was like, I wish I had this when I was 16 and trying to figure out, okay,
Wow.
what does being Orthodox mean for me?
Reminding me of something that's really crucial piece of the story is I did hear that when the show first came out, a lot of young women, whether they were teens or newly married,
Yeah.
were binging this show. And that really hit me as an educator. I was like, you know, everything that we see impacts us. And that was one of the main motives, honestly, is that I was like, I was concerned about young people, not like we need to tell the world who Orthodox
Right.
Jews are, because I didn't think this was going to get that big, but
Yeah.
I really wanted to strengthen Orthodox young women.
I love it. You're empowering people. You're basically saying, look at all these thousands of people who actually do have a choice and they're choosing this lifestyle and they're proud of it, which it's crucial.
And
We've
they're
never
role
had
models.
that before.
These are
Yeah,
role
and they're role models. Exactly. Okay, so how did the Faces of Orthodox initiative come about?
Yeah, so this My Orthodox Life response was definitely the trigger for Faces of Orthodoxy. So Faces of Orthodoxy is a social media initiative. It's a project of the Orthodox Union, the OU. I'm the creative director. And what happened was, in the middle of the whole My Orthodox Life thing, it was a very crazy 2 weeks of my life. And then, of course, every viral moment dies pretty much after that. The OU reached out to me right in the middle. And they're like, you know, we want to support what you're doing. We think this is great.
Wow.
What can we do? And I worked with them in their PR team to place articles written by strong Orthodox women writers into secular press as, you know, a response to the show and hearing the experience of Orthodox women who are proud to be Orthodox.
Yeah.
So that was really cool to have the support of a really international organization who had those kind of resources. And that was a great moment. And then very soon after it died, the OU reached out again, spearheaded by Rabbi Moshe Hauer, who's the head of the OU, and Moish Bain, who was the president at the time. And we got on a conference call, and they're like, what we clearly learned from My Orthodox Life is that we need to be telling our stories as Orthodox Jews. And we're not telling them on Netflix. And by the way, that's a whole discussion, even if we should be. Does that really have value? Do we need them to have cameras in our living rooms to show them?
Can I ask your opinion about that?
That's a really good question. I will say I really applaud Elisa Ben Shalom for what she did on Netflix with Jewish matchmaking, and that she was the first positive portrayal. I mean, it's crazy. It was on Netflix of an Orthodox woman kissing the mezuzah, wearing head coverings, being proud. I mean, she was the antidote to Julia Hart.
Yeah.
I applaud Netflix for that. Absolutely. So I think things like that, yes, I do think they can have, because here's the deal. In this society, in our world, in terms of, you know, secular America in 2025, unfortunately, people get most of their education from the entertainment world.
Yeah, TikTok.
And social media. So I do applaud, you know, people who are out there who are showing the light. What's her name? The influencer, Miriam E. I mean, her reels, like she gets like 1.5 million views on her reels. Those are 1 million people who are following her, and she's so authentic, who love her and who have learned so much. So if that's up your alley, do it. It's not for everyone. I don't think as Jews we all have to be doing that. But for those people who feel like that's calling, and Elisa Ben Shalom, Miriam, you know, people who want to share Judaism in a positive way, I do think it makes a difference.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the role of social media in the Orthodox community. And I think what's so fascinating is that when, like 10 years ago, being on Instagram, like people were secretly on
Yeah,
Instagram.
right.
I remember,
Yeah,
right?
stalkers.
But what you've done is like you and then the people who have come and like supported you and like what you've created is you basically were like, okay, social media is not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So we might as well face reality and say it's here. Why don't we use it as a tool for positivity and the truth? And that's why I created this podcast is
Amazing. Wow.
because I wish I had people like you to listen to and like hear your stories, and whether it's orthodox or not orthodox, but like strong, exactly like your mom and you, like
Yeah.
strong Jewish women who are like positive role models, I think is the biggest gift you can give to a Jewish girl,
That's
honestly.
so
So
beautiful. And the truth is there are so many positive Jewish women role models
so
who are on
many.
or using social media as that
Yeah,
platform where you
yeah,
might not have access to these women. And it used to be
exactly.
in my day that like the only speakers, you know,
Yeah,
open present role models on the speaking circuits or whatever, they had to be Rebbitzins.
yeah,
And it was that top down inspiration and everything's changed
yeah,
bottom up,
yeah.
you know?
It's so beautiful.
And I think that's why Faces of Orthodoxy, back to that, is that like that exactly what the OU said to me is they're like, we're not going on Netflix. Let's use social media. It's literally in front of people's faces
Right.
on their phone. So we can
Yeah.
use that as a medium to tell the stories of Orthodox Jews. And that's what we're trying to do. I can tell you a little bit about the initiative.
So yes, if you can explain what the initiative is and how it works, just for people to know, of
Sure.
course.
So, as I said, it's a social media initiative run by the OU. It's designed for Instagram. It's also on Facebook. And if you're on LinkedIn, because some people are only on LinkedIn and not on Facebook
Yeah,
and
yeah,
Instagram. So I just post it under my page,
yeah, yeah,
Alexandra
totally.
Fleksher. The goal of the project is to put a human face on Orthodox Jews, to really humanize us by telling the stories of real people.
Yeah,
And I think, as the English teacher, if we could like go back to my
yeah,
education, I very much believe in shared humanity and the universal values that so many of us share cross
yeah,
religion and cross cultural. And that's how you break stereotypes is when you meet the
yeah,
person, right? So you may be in a community where you've never met an Orthodox Jew in your life,
yeah.
and you think they are Amish and you think they're all Hasidish.
Absolutely.
And you read now about this woman who I'm going to be profiling in our Toronto season, who is an executive at Quaker Pepsi in
Yeah,
Toronto, and it's like, oh, but Jewish women,
yeah,
Orthodox women can do that, and it's just by the power of storytelling,
yeah.
and we're sharing stories of people who, no, they're not all executives at Quaker.
Right, yeah.
Everyone has a different story.
Yes.
Some people have personal challenges that they've overcome, physical challenges. Some people have fascinating Jewish journeys. Some people have really interesting jobs that break stereotypes. We try to feature Jews from all different backgrounds, ages, as I said,
Mm,
professions, locations, and just tell others,
yeah,
just provide. I'm back to role models. Just provide, but
I love that.
real
Yeah,
people, real stories.
yeah. I'm very excited every time I open my phone and I see one
Yeah.
of these stories. Yeah, I just find it so fascinating and it really does make a difference. I'll give you a little personal story. When I went to college in California and I studied sociology, which is why your whole cross cultural thing
Yeah.
really like speaks to me. But then I went to DC for grad school. At that point, because I was in California, I didn't really have a Jewish community. When I came to DC, one of the first people I met was Anna Nurberger, Hani
Oh
Nurberger. Do you
yeah.
know her?
Fabulous.
She
Yeah.
sat down for a coffee with
Oh
me
my God.
and she just told me her story. She's wearing a wig, she's wearing a skirt, she's wearing heels. This woman is like talking to the biggest leaders in America. And she was the first person in like years where I'm like, wow, like you are an incredible role model who is so proud of where you come from. So basically, what you're doing is you're sharing stories of the like on a much bigger level, one story and like one woman sharing a story, one man, because you do both
Yeah.
men and women, just really can make a difference in somebody's life. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's really beautiful. She's like the head of cybersecurity in the US government.
Yes,
It's
she's
like a
just
crazy
like,
position.
yes.
I do just want to share like some of our most powerful stories are people who have overcome challenges.
Yeah.
And we just profiled a woman who was a stay-at-home mom for 15 years, had 8 children, never worked a day in her life, never went to college,
Well,
was divorced, and had to figure out a way to
yeah.
support her family. And the pay it forward stories, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, and
absolutely.
she created an organization on her own, and it's
Wow.
small and it's growing, but how to support divorced women, because there's so many
Yeah.
organizations that support, you know, widows. But what about if someone's divorced and they don't know how to put bread on the table?
Right.
So
Yeah.
like that's when I can't guarantee that every story is gonna like have that emotional impact, but like those are the stories that you don't have to be Jewish. That's a human story of pain and overcoming and
Absolutely.
giving and paying forward. And that's
Yeah.
what those are the stories as humans we are so inspired by.
Exactly. Yeah. But even the ones that are about, being orthodox,
Yeah.
people could relate to that because it's about choosing things that matter to you and like sticking by it
Oh
regardless.
yes.
So it's not about the religion, it's not about like how religious, it's the themes that overlap for everybody. So, yeah,
Yes. That like staying true to your values.
exactly.
That's something that I think it's so hard to do in this day and age. And I
Yeah.
absolutely believe that there are people of other faiths who also have values, who also are trying to raise their children with their values and try to stay hold to that.
I highly recommend everyone check it out.
Thank
But
you.
you have your own podcast called Deep Meaningful Conversations Podcast, and it's with Rifki Silver as your co-host. Okay,
Hmm.
how did this start? It seems like you're just like expanding and using all sorts of different tools, which I love.
So yeah, I after I left teaching, I did some writing, and I still do freelance writing. I have a infrequent column in Mishpacha magazine that I
Yeah.
really need to get back to. um, and that's sort of when I went into like communication, you know, maybe even like dabbling a little bit in media,
Yeah.
and Jewish media. Like that's sort of where I found my new calling. And this was in the middle of COVID. This was when like
Yeah.
many people started their podcast. Now we were just saying, this is 5 years later. There is like an abundance
Yeah.
of Orthodox podcasts,
Yeah.
and more women are starting,
It's really
right?
cool.
But 5 years ago during COVID, there really weren't female Orthodox podcasts. And Rifki Silver, my friend, she lives here in Cleveland. We had done like some Shabbos project, like
Yeah.
volunteer community stuff together. And she's like, I've had this, bucket list dream to do a podcast. I want to do it with you. And I'm like, great. Now what? Like where do you begin? She's super techie. She's a classically trained musician. I am not
What?
techie. Yeah, she's super talented and uses that talent. I think
Wow.
she composed and wrote the music that's on our podcast.
That's incredible.
And she's the one who does all the editing and all the post production and makes everything sounds amazing. But our goal really was the model of not like, hi, I'm the podcast host and I'm
Yeah.
interviewing this amazing person, because there are a lot of models like that of, the superstars with
Yeah.
one person. We wanted this to be more of like conversational, like almost like not The View, but
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
women talking. Because I
Yeah.
think often we get that feedback is the segments where we're schmoozing in the beginning of
Yeah.
the interview and at the end where we rehash and we're just talking amongst ourselves. People are like, we feel like we're sitting at a
Yes.
table having coffee with you, like we're part of that conversation.
Yeah.
That I think is something unique that we offer. And yeah, for sure, we interview the most amazing
Yeah.
Orthodox women. Again, I'm all about the role models. What I love about my work, and I think this is where DMC, Deep Meaningful Conversations, and Faces of Orthodoxy overlap. I'm finding so much gratification and fulfillment and putting other people forward and highlighting
Wow.
other people
It's
and putting the
incredible.
spotlight at others. And if I'll bring that back to my education days, that's what I did in the
Yeah.
classroom. It's like
Yeah.
censored teaching. It wasn't about me standing in the front. It's how can I spotlight my kids? So that same passion I love, and I love doing that with my podcast, and I learned so much. Our guests are like people we want to hear from, topics.
Wow.
We're sort of more topic based, so
Yeah.
we'll be exploring like
Yeah.
issues or concepts and find the right guests to talk about them. And we release every 2 weeks. It is a labor of love. It's a
Yeah.
passion. We have never ending lists of women. We will never run out of women to profile. I don't know if you have
Yeah.
the same experience.
No, well, somebody asked, "Are you worried that eventually you're going to run out of women?" I was like, I had over 100 women on my list before I started this
Oh my
podcast,
God.
and it just keeps growing.
But don't you see also like how technology is so incredible
Yes.
this way? Is that like it used to be you never had access. You
Yes.
just didn't have access to these people, and now we have this like global Jewish community
Yeah,
of
it's
so
amazing.
many incredible people to profile
Yeah.
and to share with the world.
I also think the reason people like the conversation part from your podcast is because it's authentic, and
Yeah.
a lot of our life now is so curated, and so I'm
Yeah.
sure it gives people a sense of like, okay, I'm sitting with my friends and we can have this conversation and
Yeah.
be real. So I think it's very important. Okay, last question. This is a question I ask all my guests.
Sure.
Alex, what does being a trailblazer mean to you?
I love that. First of all, I just love this name, TrailBLAZER. I just love
Thank
it.
you.
There's just so much like passion and energy and fire, because it's not like leading a path. It's literally blazing a trail, like with fire. And that really resonates with me. I think being a trailblazer to me must start with an inner voice. It must start with an inner fire and inner passion, because you cannot blaze a trail for others
Yeah.
and light that fire and make that path alight if you don't have some inner
Yeah.
fire that's
I love that.
burning you, right?
Yeah.
And I'll say that's one of my struggles with writing. As I mentioned before, I have a opinion column in Mishpacha magazine, and that has been a huge platform for me to share with hundreds of thousands of Orthodox Jews around the world topics I'm passionate about, like the teacher
Yeah.
shortage, like the economic struggles living in the Orthodox world. And having that platform has led to really some incredible things by sharing
Wow.
my voice there. But before I write, I got to have something burning underneath me.
Yes,
So
yes.
and when I'm not having it, or I'm too busy with all my other stuff or my
Yeah.
personal life, I'm like, nothing's lighting my fire, and I
Yes, I
can't,
totally get that.
you know what I mean?
Yes.
I don't have what to share.
Yeah.
So I feel that, as I said, like, it's so important to have that like self-knowledge.
Yeah.
And the goal is not, I want to be a woman of influence. I want to be an influencer. I want to be a trailblazer. There's just, that cannot be part of the vocabulary. It's just following your voice, following your heart, following your passion, doing you. And if that happens to impact other people as a result, that is the biggest gift. But that's not why you are.
Yes. Oh, such an important thing to say. It all also is about storytelling. You're really sharing stories.
I do think so.
Yes.
Because we're humans, and we're sick of, you said, that curated stuff on Instagram. Like, we've had enough. We don't
absolutely.
But we're also very wary of oversharing and being too vulnerable.
I know. It's a really fine balance. I think we're trying to figure it out.
Totally. And that's something all the time on the podcast we discuss. Like, I'm not going to now have some vent about what's going on in my personal life, because that's a boundary I will not cross. So in anything I do, I try to find that balance.
Oh, amazing. Alex, thank you so much. Wow, I have so much to think about now.